to be here among us today. It is always difficult to introduce someone who needs no introduction. In this case, in the case of Professor Byram, it is true, most true. The least I can say is that Professor Byram is, without any shadow of doubt, one of the world's leading authorities in his field of research, that of multiculturalism and language education and policy. Indeed, Professor Byram is widely known for his contribution in intercultural studies in education, bilingual education, foreign language education, and policy studies in education. He was also a key figure in the elaboration of the influential document, the Common European Framework of Reference. Professor Byram was until recently, for over 10 years, a program advisor to the Council of Europe Language Policy Division. He has authored several books and many articles in international journals, including Teaching and Assessing Intercultural Communicative Companies, 1997, Culture et l'éducation en langue étrangère, 1992, Language Teacher, Politics and Cultures with Karl Weisler, 1999, Language Learners and Ethnographers with Roberts and R. 2001, Intercultural Experience and Education, edited with Orr and Fleming, 2002, From Foreign Language Education to Education for Intercultural Citizenship, 2008, the Common European Framework of Reference, the Globalization of Language Education Policy with Parliament, just this month, 2012, and the list is very long. Now, Professor Byram is also the editor of the Routledge Encyclopedia of Language Teaching and Learning, 2000, and a joint series editor of Languages for Intercultural Communication and Education, Multilingual Matters. To end up my introduction, I do inform you that the only time in his career when Professor Byram thought English as a foreign language goes back to 1965, 1966, and that was in Algeria. And guess where? In Mascara. So please join me to welcome Professor Michael Byram.
About me, but about you. You know about me. I'm here. I know something about you, that you are. I mean, I look around, and in every country in the world, when I address an audience of people dealing with languages, what do I see? I see women. And as your professor says, that's because women are more intelligent.
Thank you.
And language learning is difficult. And therefore, and language learning is difficult, so women are better at it. I say, I don't, of course, I only know a little about you, and I know about you as that you are mainly students, that you are master's students, I think?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Magister students? Yeah. Shake for no, and nod for yes. But I think an identity is important. When we talk to each other,
yes,
we understand each other better if we know who we're talking to.
Yes, that's true.
So, Professor has introduced me as the person who is a professor of education, and he mentioned the word education many times, and that's important, because that is my professional identity. That I was, as you said, my first experience as a teacher was teaching English in Mascara, many years ago, before you were born. most of you. So that's one identity. And that became part of that was in a sense important for my career. Before I was a teacher in Mascara, I was thinking of maybe working in the Foreign Office, something to do with languages, but maybe in the Foreign Office or British Council or something. And I enjoyed my teaching in Mascara so much that I decided I would become a teacher. So eventually I became a teacher of languages, but in Britain, in England, and therefore foreign languages is not English. I became a teacher of French as a foreign language and German as a foreign language. Wonderful. Those are my elephants. From one of my, well, the only visit I made to Tanzania. And that is important to me as well. Because I went on that holiday with my children, about 5-6 years ago, maybe less. So another identity is my identity as a father. So today maybe you'll hear more about my identity as a professor of education and teacher, less about my identity as a father. I'm also a grandfather, and that's also very important. So identities is something which I will talk about today from time to time as we talk about language learning and identity. So now I have to have a 30-second pause, what is called a PowerPoint pause, while I find my PowerPoint. And then this afternoon we will talk about language, about methodology, research methodology. And then later in the week about teaching. So in a sense we're starting at the top and working downwards. And you can, of course, you can take notes, but I also have a text which I will give to your professor, and he can give it to you by email or whatever. So you can make notes, but if you miss something, it doesn't matter, because you can read my text afterwards. Now, so the Council of Europe. And as your professor said, I was, for 10 years until last year, 2 years ago, I was an advisor from a languages perspective. So Europe is the European Union, which has 27 countries, but also the Council of Europe, which has 47 countries. So that's Europe, or it's a part of it. Because Russia, of course, goes on and on until it meets China. So Europe is a very big space, not just the 27 countries of kind of the West and Central Europe, but the 47 countries of the Council of Europe. And if you counted all the languages there, I don't think anybody has, but if you went to each country, I mean, if you take Russia, there are dozens, if not hundreds of languages. Russian dominates, of course. But even in the United Kingdom, which consists of Northern Ireland, Scotland, as you know, then we have, well, it's difficult to be clear, but we have sort of two official languages, English and Welsh, and then other languages, Gaelic in Scotland, Cornish in England, but then also many new languages from, particularly from India and Pakistan. So England is already, it's a small place, but it's also a multilingual place. So if you counted all the languages, there are hundreds. So what's happening, or what has happened in Europe in terms of language teaching? And what does that, in a sense, tell us about what we can do in the world? And ultimately, you have to think about what it means for you in your part of the world, in your country, but also in your region, in North Africa, in Maghreb. If we think back to the beginning of the work of the Council of Europe, remember, travel from North Africa to Europe, from Spain to Northern Europe, from Eastern Europe to Western Europe, all looking for work. And so there was this, what you can call economic mobility. And the first stimulus for work on language teaching in Europe, at a European level, was economic mobility. Of course, in a national level, we had been teaching languages at a national level for 100 years or more. I mean, roughly speaking, the language teaching in its modern way began at the end of the 19th century. And so I learned, in my school, I learned French and German. But it took me a long time. It took me 5 years of 3 or 4 lessons a week in order to pass the first examination. And in those days, I didn't speak anything very much. But the people who were coming to, for example, to France from here, or from Spain, or from Portugal looking for work, or from Turkey, in particular to Germany, looking for work, they couldn't spend 5 years learning. So the Council of Europe developed this idea that we must find a way of teaching them quickly. And so we must find a way of finding out what their needs are. What do they need to do? And so in the 1960s, 1963, 64, they analyzed the needs. It was very simple, in a way. It was very simple. They asked somebody, and I can remember his name, it's not important now, but they asked somebody to say, to spend a week or so in Germany with a Turkish worker, and to just be with him all day long, and to note down what he needed to say, what he needed to be able to understand and say, and read, because he needed to be able to buy something to eat, so he needed the language of everyday shopping, but he also needed to be able to read the instructions in the factory where he was working. He needed to be able to understand the instructions from his boss, and so on and so on. So they noted all that down, and did that needs analysis, and that became the beginning of the work of the Council of Europe. And then 40 years later, one result of that was called the Common European Framework. So language teaching became very practical. And it started with adults, with the needs of adults. And by 1970, when I was teaching children in secondary school, when I was teaching them French or German, the ideas that had been developed for adults were beginning to have an effect upon schools. And in the schools, we were saying, okay, we realize that for these children,